illegal detentions. Governments must refrain from using legal frameworks as instruments of politically motivated prosecutions. The fairness and impartiality of judicial processes are critical to maintaining public trust in democracy. This case tests our collective commitment to human rights and press freedom. If we tolerate the persecution of those who reveal the truth, we undermine the very foundation of pluralistic democratic society. The core values of our organization oblige us to stand firmly in defense of justice, the rule of law, transparency, and human rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vardanyan. And now we go to Ms. Gökçen from Turkey.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, dear colleagues. First of all, I would like to thank the rapporteur for this excellent work. The disproportionate way Julian Assange was persecuted has a chilling effect on the media in the US and worldwide. Revealing human rights abuses is an act of journalism, and abusing the Espionage Act sends a message to authoritarian regimes, some of which are concerned by the information revealed on WikiLeaks. This encourages these regimes to threaten our democracies. Abusing the Espionage Act sends another message to the citizens. Individuals report that if they speak up against human rights abuses, they can be marginalized, even prosecuted. Today, similar laws to the Espionage Act are being prepared in many countries. These laws target journalists, but also civil society activism, freedom of association, and even diplomatic activity. Public rumors of this type of law have a chilling effect. I know associations in Turkey that have stopped their activity because of this. It is normal that states are able to keep state secrets in order to protect their national security interests, but where do we draw the line? That is the question in Europe and worldwide. In a time of geopolitical crisis, of course, there are security problems, and we will continue having security problems. But the question is, how are we going to address these security issues? Under the rule of law and with our democratic values, or outside this framework? We must always uphold our values: human rights, freedom of speech, freedom of association. These are values that make Europe, Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gökçen. And now, Mr. Christophe Bricot from Monaco.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam President. I would also like to congratulate the rapporteur for the excellent report which has been presented today. This deals with the substance of issues such as the right to information and the balance to be found between state secrets necessary to protect us in a dangerous world and the right of journalists to do their job and to keep the public informed. What's particularly surprising in this case is that the work done is actually famous and notorious. It's rather simpler to the Panama Papers. It's like Watergate, if you like. Back then, the journalists who carried out the investigations became famous. They had films made about them. We have to remember that news and information must be available to the public because news, information are the beating heart of democracy. Citizens who are well informed are in a position to take enlightened decisions. And everything we've heard this week confirms that. It's essential that we ensure that journalists be in a position to disseminate news and information while protecting their sources and their readers. That's very important if the world is to remain informed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bricot. And now I give the floor to Konstantinos Evstasiou from Cyprus.
Συγχαίρω την εισηγήτρια για την πολύ γενναία και αποκαλυπτική της έκθεση.
Thank you for this very revealing report. This must be a wake-up call. The Assange case must truly be a wake-up call for the future in the face of the suppression of political freedoms for European citizens in the name of an abuse of political correctness. The unfair treatment of Julian Assange is shocking. This is an obstacle to the defense of human rights, and especially media freedom and freedom of information. Julian Assange was instrumentalized in order to create a climate of fear, creating a chilling effect on the media to silence them. The harsh and disproportionate treatment of Julian Assange reveals how dysfunctional our democratic institutions are and the practices of some governments which are unacceptable, especially when their interests are threatened by the revelation of the truth. Revealing the truth should not be prosecuted on the pretext of national security. On the contrary, we must protect such a whistleblowing of secret information, first of all through self-regulation and according to the principle of responsibility and transparency. In Assange's case, all this has been instrumentalized for repressive purposes against the principles of the rule of law. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eustathio. And now I give the floor to Anna-Kristiina Mikkonen from Finland.
Madam President, colleagues, I would like to start by thanking the rapporteur, Suna, for her excellent work. At a time marked by fake news and alternative reality, the public's ability to read in a critical way information sources is essential. In Europe and the whole world, indeed, the importance of press freedom and the freedom of expression has been cast into stark relief by the threats they face. Media and journalists have to share responsibility when it comes to the fight against dissemination of propaganda. So as to save our common values, we have to strengthen trust in democratic institutions and increase resilience of society as a whole. The watchdog role of the press guarantees that democratic states, underpinned by the rule of law, operate effectively. This role of the press is particularly important in the light of the brutality of current armed conflicts and the growing number and growing seriousness of acts of transnational repression. If public institutions are not able to respond effectively and appropriately to abuse, the role of the press and whistleblowers becomes crucial. WikiLeaks publications, for example, have confirmed the existence of secret prisons, as well as secret and illegal kidnapping and transfers of prisoners carried out by the United States on European territory. The first legal action taken against Mr. Assange concerned accusations of hacking. Mr. Assange was also charged under the American law on espionage dating back to 1917. This meant that Mr. Assange thereby became the first director of a news outlet to have been prosecuted by dint of this legislation for having published classified information obtained from a whistleblower. The Assange case, and in particular the role of Manning, is a very good reason to continue our efforts to try to achieve better protection of whistleblowers throughout the world. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Mikkonen. And now I give the floor to Paul Gavin from Ireland.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. This week we saw the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe at its worst and at its best. Its worst moment was the continuing refusal to take a stand against the genocide being prosecuted against the Palestinian people. Its best moment was the powerful testimony of Julian Assange at the Committee for Legal Affairs yesterday. I salute Julian for his incredible courage and valour. I salute the work of all of those, both within and outside this Assembly, who have worked for Julian's freedom. And I believe it was truly significant that Julian, in his remarks, made a number of references both to Ukraine and Gaza and the deliberate murder of journalists in both locations. So I want to commend the rapporteur for this powerful and timely report. The calling out of transnational repression and politically motivated prosecution should be recognised and commended. It is needed now more than ever. And please let us reject, in the strongest terms, this attempt to deny that Julian's incarceration and torture were not politically motivated. The dogs in the street know that Julian's case was all about politics. As an Irish Republican, I would also point out that Britain, unfortunately, has a long history of denying political prisoners. True. We need to look at the subject matter that Julian exposed, which was political, the exposure of war crimes. We need to look at the vital public information that he put into the public domain, which was of a political nature. We need to look at the offence with which he was charged, a textbook political offence. Not to mention the fact that the CIA planned to kidnap and assassinate him. How on earth could this not be a political action? Julian put it best yesterday. He said the fundamental issue is simple. Journalists should not be prosecuted for doing their jobs. One of the most frustrating things over the last 5 years is that a large chunk of the body politic, both here and across Europe, chose to bury their heads in the sand. They chose to be silent in relation to this outrageous series of acts against this fine man. And it's disappointing to note that today, this is the shortest list of political speakers for any debate this week. What does that tell us about the continuing silence? So the least we can do today is endorse this report, endorse this excellent report, because our job is to defend media freedom, and it's needed now more than ever. And I will finish with another short quotation from Julian yesterday, which I think should also apply to us all. Let us stop gagging, torturing, and killing each other for a change. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gavan. And now Mr. Didier Marie from France.
Ça y est, je crois que ça fonctionne. Merci, Madame.
Thank you. I would like to congratulate our colleague Suna for the quality of her report. And I'd like to thank Mr. Assange, who spoke for the first time since he was released from prison before the Committee of Legal Affairs. Our Assembly, as early as 2011, had adopted a resolution for the abuse of the argument of national security and state secrets as an obstacle to parliamentary oversight of human rights violations, and his situation is not only an individual case, even though we can only imagine the impact that the 14 last years have had on him, but his case highlights the tension between state secrets and democracy, state secrets and upholding human rights, protecting the interests of states and protecting whistleblowers. The resolution proposed today is balanced because it recognizes legitimate measures viewing to protect state secrets and national security, but the draft resolution reaffirms very strongly that information's related to the responsibility of state officials having perpetrated war crimes or human rights violations are not secrets that should be protected. Some sometimes believe that the respect of human rights and the rule of law are something that is adjustable, that is flexible. It seems very important that we state once again the principles of the Convention of Human Rights in their entirety. It's not a menu that you can cherry pick. Human rights must not be denied or diminished depending on circumstances. Yesterday, before the Committee on Legal Affairs, Julian Assange stated that he was not free today because the system worked, but because after years of incarceration, he had pleaded guilty of journalism, guilty of seeking information from a source and informing the public. Our rapporteur underlines what is at stake here, the proportionality of what he is accused of in the United States. He fears that his condemnation under the Espionage Act may create a chilling effect for journalists, editors, whistleblowers and media outlets. This is a very complex debate, legally speaking. I would underline that the case of Julian Assange, as well as others, has led to legislative adaptations in many states. Under François Hollande, the French Parliament adopted in 2016 a first law about the protection of whistleblowers, which was adjusted in 2022, transposing a European directive at the initiative of Sylvain Wasserman, a former member of PACE. I hope that this debate and this resolution will be heard beyond the Council of Europe and will enable us to protect freedom of expression and whistleblowers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marier. And now, Mr. Julian Paulke from Germany.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, thank you for coming here, Julian. It's a pleasure and a privilege having you here in this Parliamentary Assembly that is a democratic assembly for the protection of human rights. And dear Suna, thank you for looking into this matter with diligence, with patience, and with a clear view on what is important on this topic. Julian Assange is a journalist, I would say, of a different kind. He's not writing catchy articles, selecting headlines, but he was publishing. And therefore, this considers to be journalism. And therefore, the release is not a win for the freedom of press. At the end, it was a deal that was helping the United States to maintain their image. And Julian Assange is not a whistleblower. He was handling the data others provided to WikiLeaks. And WikiLeaks and their behavior can be debated on a moral basis, but not on a legal one. But the consequences for the freedom of press are a chilling effect. And in the center of this chilling effect, and the root cause, is the Espionage Act. And in the consequences, we need to pay attention what the consequences for our member states, for the Council of Europe, and for Europe itself can be. And I believe we need an umbrella of protection against the Espionage Act in the Council of Europe member states, to protect civil society organizations, to protect the freedom of press, and to protect whistleblowers and those who are publishing their data and knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Paulke. And now Mrs. Petra Bayer from Austria.
Ja, herzlichen Dank. Ich möchte mich auch zuerst bei Suna bedanken für diesen wichtigen Bericht.
Thank you. I would also like to thank Suna for this excellent report. I would also, of course, like to thank Julian Assange not only for the enormous courage he's shown over the years, but also the fact that just 3 months after his release, he's found his way to us here in the Council of Europe and its Parliamentary Assembly. I think that underlines the importance of the work the Council has been doing when it comes to defending press freedom when it's under threat. That means that we have to ensure that whistleblowers get the protection they need and deserve. As we can see that the situation surrounding the Assange case goes far beyond Europe. At a time of ever greater pressure on the rule of law, it's important that we step up our game so as to ensure that we can better protect freedom and enable independent media to continue to exist, since they have such an important role in telling the truth and providing critical thinking, which is essential if we are to see through fake news. Freedom of expression and press freedom are two of the foundations of a free society. On a personal note, this has been something of a specialization for me in my work as a politician over the last 15 years, dating back to the days when I was involved in school newspapers as a young person in Vienna. So press freedom is essential. I'm delighted not only that Julian Assange has been released. That is, of course, a good thing, although it took far too long. What I do regret is that his release wasn't underpinned by a legal verdict. I think it would have been very important to have some kind of legal ruling which would have provided greater legal certainty to people who dare to denounce illegal action. So without a ruling from either the UK court or the European Court of Human Rights, this does leave something of a void, which means that there's a justified fear that such goings-on can continue and that journalists won't necessarily benefit from protection. So I think it's our job to ensure that people who want to divulge what's going on get our support. And the deterrence value of Julian Assange having passed all those years, spent all those years in solitary confinement is enormous. So it's essential that we do our best to guarantee the space so that whistleblowers and journalists can divulge information of this type.
Thank you, Ms. Bair. And now the floor goes to Mr. George Loukaides from Cyprus.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. Dear colleagues, I want to extend my deep appreciation to our rapporteur for her important report addressing a matter that has sparked considerable concern both across Europe, the US, and beyond. I fully share the rapporteur's deep alarm over the profound implications that Assange's previous continued detention and eventual conviction under the Espionage Act entails for the future of press freedom, human rights, and investigative journalism. The findings of this report highlight a troubling precedent. A journalist has been prosecuted for publishing information exposing state misconduct, including war crimes, torture, arbitrary detention, and other human rights violations. This strikes at the very heart of democratic accountability. It is essential that we recognize the long-term chilling effects on freedom of expression at a global scale. Let us not forget that investigative journalists who often risk their lives and liberty to expose injustice rely on the ability to publish sensitive information in order to be able to inform us, the public, of governmental wrongdoings. Assange's case sets an alarming precedent for journalists and whistleblowers who now face criminal prosecution simply for doing their duty in revealing the truth. Furthermore, journalists working for small media outlets or as independent editors many times lack the financial ability to meet the subsequent legal burdens and costs to defend themselves. By targeting investigative journalists, dear colleagues, silencing impartial and responsible reporting, and covering up corruption-related allegations, we are in fact sending a clear signal that those who reveal government crimes, rather than those who commit them, will be the ones punished. Furthermore, we are deeply concerned that such actions will discourage other journalists and media organizations from reporting on issues of significant public concern. This will lead to increased self-censorship. Such a development would, in the long run, erode the foundation of democracy itself, where informed citizens hold their governments accountable. For those of us committed to defending the rights of workers, minorities, and the most vulnerable, this is not just an abstract legal question. The ability to expose abuses of power and corruption are essential in the fight for social justice, equality, and human dignity. The case of Julian Assange, therefore, echoes our broader efforts aimed at protecting our democratic institutions and our right to freely question and criticize those in positions of authority. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Locaides. And now, Mr. Emmanuel Fernandez from France.
Merci.
Thank you, dear colleagues. Mr. and Mrs. Assange. First of all, I'd like to thank the rapporteur for her very precious work. I fully agree with. The reason we're here today is not only because Julian Assange is here, we're also here for Sabri Al-Qurashi, an artist who has painted over 3,000 paintings and whose art is known worldwide. Sabri was tortured over 15 years in Guantanamo and released without a trial, without a verdict. He wasted a third of his life, and we know this thanks to the report published on WikiLeaks about Guantanamo Bay, the illegal extradition and torture of over 700 Muslim men and boys, many of whom were innocents. We're here for Khaled El-Masri, a German national who was kidnapped, extradited, sodomized and tortured by a CIA agent when he was holidaying in Macedonia. We know that this was a case of mistaken identity for which the US then exerted pressure on the German government so that they would not prosecute the CIA agent. And Mr. El-Masri used WikiLeaks communiques to demonstrate this before the Court of Human Rights that ruled in his favor. Yes, Julian Assange has worked for human rights, revealing the implication of so-called democratic states in ghastly crimes. He worked for the public interest, including my country, France, revealing that the US National Security Agency, NSA, wiretapped 3 French presidents between 2006 and 2013. In France, in September 2023, the investigating journalist of the site disclosed, Ariane Lavrieux, was incarcerated for 39 hours. Her home was searched. Her phone and computer data was gathered. And 2 years earlier, she had revealed that France was an accomplice in the extrajudicial killing of hundreds of people in Egypt. By voting in favor of the text we have before us today, we will contribute to making sure that the persecution of Julian Assange never happens again. These revelations, exercising the activity of journalist in the most brilliant way, means that Julian Assange was incarcerated as a political prisoner. The resolution 19,000 from 2012 very clearly outlines the criteria for political prisoners. A person deprived of their individual liberty is considered as a political prisoner if he is detained in violation of one of the fundamental guarantees enshrined in the European Convention of Human Rights and its protocols, especially freedom of speech. Dear colleagues, we have a heavy responsibility to guarantee justice for those who were killed, mutilated and brutalized in the wars that have occurred, but also those that are currently underway and those that will happen. Today, we must contribute to making sure that journalists aren't silenced or killed with impunity, to make sure that civilians can live in peace, and to create and foster a democratic culture in our societies. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fernandez. And now, Ms. Laura Castel from Spain.
Thank you, Chair. Colleagues, every day we make choices that set the course of the daily lives and human rights of millions of citizens. Since I am here, I seek to do this duty with diligence and in good conscience. Because after all, if we, as the guardians of the European Convention, do not choose to secure human rights, who else will? There are a number of important areas covered in this excellent report, including transnational repression, extraterritorial application of US laws, absolute impunity for war criminals, and more. Besides, I want to acknowledge the suffering of Mr. Assange's loved ones and him, but also to take you closer to my home in Catalonia and the Pegasus affair, when at least 70 members of Catalan civil society were systematically and repeatedly spied upon. Because there is something to be said about impunity for illegal surveillance, There is a direct line from the impunity from Spain, spying on dissident voices, lawyers, journalists, and politicians, destroying democracy, and not to addressing the WikiLeaks revelations of US spying on 125 German officials, including Madame Merkel. Similarly, there is also a direct line to illegal surveillance by the US of Mr. Assange's privileged legal and medical conversations inside the sovereign embassy using a Spanish security firm. So, what this say about the rule of law in the United Kingdom and the Council of Europe if we, the guardians of the rule of law, say to okay for legal processes that forces an innocent and tortured journalist to admit to espionage in order not to die in a prison? Regarding journalist protections, the European Court of Human Rights views the solicitation and publication of information as essential journalistic activities, and Assange actions are protected under these principles. Further, the charges against Assange serve to deter journalists and whistleblowers from exposing US actions in the war on terror, despite no harm has been proven. In 14 years, the US has not shown that WikiLeaks publications caused any harm, which was acknowledged in the Manning trial and plea agreement. So, I urge you to vote in favor for this report, for the rule of law, for the human rights, and for democracy. Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, Suna. Gracias, Julian Assange.
Thank you, Ms. Castell, and that concludes the list of speakers. As we still have some time, is there anyone here who would like to contribute in the debate? I don't see anyone. So we go to the procedure with the documents we have. Now I call the rapporteur, Ms. Avars-Todir, to reply. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam President. Dear colleagues, I would like to thank for this good debate about this important topic. And I would like to point out that if you look at the definition of a political prisoner, Julian Assange and his case fulfills this definition. He was convicted for engaging in acts of journalism. This is a clear instance of a politically motivated incarceration. If it were any other country, if it were one of the countries that we are happy to point towards having political prisoners on a regular basis here in the Parliamentary Assembly, I don't think that there would be much of a question on whether or not this assembly is fit to determine whether someone is or is not a political prisoner. We did indeed ourselves create this definition. So of course we are mandated to determine when someone fulfills this definition. We've done it many times before in other reports of this assembly. So we are not a court, but we are a standard-setting body of human rights. And if we shy away from telling the truth on this subject matter, I fear that we lose all credibility. It shouldn't matter where a person is incarcerated based on political grounds. It should matter that it happened and that we say that it shouldn't be allowed to happen. We must ask ourselves, what does this case say to those who risk their lives to report on corruption, war crimes, and human rights abuses? It says that if you dare to publish the truth, you may face the full wrath of the law, however archaic and unjust the law is. It says that in the struggle between power and truth, power will prevail. And that it is a message that no democratic society should ever allow its government to send. That is a message that the Assembly must forcefully reject. I have done my homework on this report. I have examined the aspects of this case very thoroughly. I have met with Julian Assange while he was in Belmarsh Prison, and I am happy to welcome him here as a free man. But we must not allow his case to be repeated. We cannot allow the United States or any other state to sentence journalists for doing journalistic work, to chase them across borders, to send the message that you are not safe wherever you are if you report on secrets about war crimes, abductions, torture, secret prisons, the prisoners in Guantanamo Bay, that instead of the perpetrators of those crimes being prosecuted, the person that told us about them is put in prison and humiliated. I hope, dear colleagues, you can support this report. It's incredibly important, and I thank you all for this debate.
Thank you, Mrs. Savas-Todir, and I would like to ask Ms. Lesia Vasilenko if she would like to speak, if you would like to speak on the behalf of the committee.
Thank you, Madam President. And indeed, dear colleagues, on behalf of the Committee of the Legal Affairs and Human Rights, I would like to thank our rapporteur, Suna Avesdottir, for her excellent work on preparing this report, which is about the core principles of justice, of openness, and of freedoms. I also thank all the members of the Assembly for their valuable contributions to our debate in this hemicycle today and for their participation in the exchanges with Julian Assange yesterday during the committee. Dear colleagues, the rapporteur achieved a very difficult goal of shortly and clearly presenting a very complex case that has captivated millions of people for the past 14 years. While the report devotes significant attention to Mr. Assange, it is clear that the consequences of his conviction under the Espionage Act will affect the entire media industry. First of all, the mere fact of Mr. Assange being indicted under the Espionage Act contributes to the creation of a chilling effect. Furthermore, he is, in fact, the first ever publisher to be convicted under this legislation, which was designed to punish spies and enemies of the state. The biggest threat is not just that journalists will now be prosecuted under the Espionage Act, it is further reaching. Editors and publishers will start discussing whether they can publish classified information that contributes to public debate. The climate of self-censorship must be avoided at all costs so that our societies can remain free and hold their governments to account. This, the rapporteur has rightly pointed out in the report. The draft resolution, which is before us today, aims towards reversing the dangerous trend of eroding media freedom. Dear colleagues, the committee has, by a large majority, agreed to the approach of our rapporteur. Therefore, I encourage you to support this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Vasilenko. We closed the debate. The Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights has presented a draft resolution to which 10 amendments have been tabled. I remind you that speeches on amendments are limited to 30 seconds. Any amendment which has been unanimously approved by the committee size for report shall not be put to the vote in plenary and shall be declared as definitely approved unless the 10 or more members of the Assembly object. I understand that Vice Chairperson of the committee wishes to propose to the Assembly that amendments 1 and 5 to the draft resolution, which were unanimously approved, be declared as approved. As for amendments 7, 8, and 10, which were also unanimously approved by the committee, we will have to deal with this separately because they interact with other amendments. Is that so, Mrs. Vasilenko?
Yes, President, this is so.
Thank you. If no objects, I will consider amendments 1 and 5 to be approved. No objection. Amendments 1 to 5 to the draft resolution are therefore approved and will not be called. The request of the committee, I understand that amendments 2, 3, and 4 to the draft resolution were rejected by the committee with a 2/3 majority. However, as these amendments interact with other amendments, we will have to deal with this separately. I call Mr. Konstantinos Evstathiou to support Amendment 6. You have 30 seconds.
This amendment number 6 deals with a factual situation that 13 years since the publications, no evidence has been produced showing that WikiLeaks publications have harmed anyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to support this amendment? Is anyone against? Anyone would like to speak against this amendment? What is the committee's position on this amendment?
Has approved this amendment by 19 votes.
Thank you. I shall now put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. The amendment is agreed. Now we go to the amendment number 2. I call Lord Richard Keane to support the amendment.
Why this isn't, it is now working. Colleagues, I don't intend to move Amendment 2. Thank you.
Okay, we speak then to the next amendment. Amendment number 7. I call Mr. Konstantinos Evstathiou to support the amendment. You have 30 seconds.
The essence of this amendment is that there's a reference and a reminder to basic principle of our organization, that is the freedom of expression. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? None. The committee unanimously accepted this amendment. I shall now put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. The amendment is approved. Thank you. We go now to amendment number 8, and I call Mr. Konstantinos Evstathiou to support the amendment.
Thank you. This amendment intends to give a more accurate picture of what happened in the process of we're discussing. So it's needed to have a most accurate picture of the situation. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone would like to speak against? No. So I put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. Amendment is agreed. Amendment 8 is agreed. Now, amendment number 9, I call Mr. Konstantinos Evstathiou to speak on the amendment.
The amendment is self-explained. The definition of political prisoner coincides with the political action of Julian Assange. That is the reason of the table of this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. If this amendment is adopted, Amendment 3 falls. Does anyone would like to speak against the amendment?
Thank you, colleagues. I would like to oppose this amendment. This underlines the point about political prisoner. And indeed, the mover of the motion rather, if I may put it this way, gave the game away. It's not the actions of Julian Assange that are critical, or which I would at all criticise. It's the definition of his detention within the United Kingdom. He was not detained as a political prisoner. That's a simple matter of legal fact. And if we ignore that, I think we devalue the report.
Thank you. What is the committee's position on this amendment?
Approved by large majority.
Thank you. I put the amendment to the vote now. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. Amendment is adopted.
16.
Amendment number 4. I call Lord Richard Keane to support.
I'm not going to move this amendment. Thank you.
So then we go to the next amendment number 10. I call Mr. Konstantinos Evstathiou to support the amendment.
Conclusions of the UN Special Rapporteur provide an objective framework of the whole affair, so this is the reason of this amendment.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? No. The committee unanimously accepted this amendment. I put the amendment to the vote now. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. Amendment is accepted. We will now proceed to vote on the draft resolution contained in document 16040 as amended. A simple majority is required. The vote is open.
Once you announce the results, the sitting is going to resume at 11:55.
The vote is closed.
Draft resolution is adopted.
Yeah. I call for the result to be yes. The draft resolution is adopted. Thank you all, and I announce that the sitting will resume at 11:55.